change color like this. Oh, I got one. Hello, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather. I brought the harvest baskets out into the garden today because we are going to harvest quite a lot of the kale, maybe some of the elephant garlic. Pretty excited. The garden is kind of in a transitional period right now where some stuff is coming up and some of the stuff that I recently put in is starting to germinate and really start getting going, which is exciting. I have this tea rose in the front of the garden. I put this in here last year. The blooms are pink and super, super fragrant. I was a little bit worried that it was just going to be a one and done kind of bloom year, and that was making me sad, but I can see lots of new buds coming on here, which is good. And all this red, this is all new foliage too. So next week, I'm sure we'll see some beautiful blooms out of this rose. Behind the rose, these are the sunflowers that I planted just a couple of weeks ago. I thinned them out. This guy looks like maybe the birds got to it, but most of them look really good. This one's really big. And sunflowers grow fast. All the lettuces in the archway entryway area here are so close to flowering. Can you see the flower buds here? All of these lettuces are from a Rocky Top lettuce mix that I bought probably from Baker Creek. And so these are all heirlooms. We will be saving back a bunch of seed, as well as highly anticipating many volunteers here in the walkway. I love a good volunteer. Speaking of volunteer, before we get to harvesting the kale, let's check on the squash that I showed you in the compost pile last week. It's getting really big. I don't know what kind of squash this is. Some people have theorized that it's a tromboncino. I haven't been able to tell just yet. Sometimes you can see at the base of the flower blooms the little tiny shape of the squash to be, but I don't see any of that still this week. This is an important time to bring up an important topic when it comes to squash. Volunteer squash really could be from any variety, but there is a chance that this is a crossbreed of two different squashes. And when it comes to squash, sometimes the crossbreeding can go wrong. There's a thing called toxic squash. I don't know if it's a syndrome. Sometimes crossing squash can turn out bad and the resulting fruit is in fact toxic. But from what I hear, that squash is really bitter and you don't want to eat it anyway. I've never experienced something like that. So hopefully whatever this is recognizable and not some kind of inedible cross. But even then, I didn't plant it, so it's not like it's a loss. I'm pretty sure the tomato that's over here is a yellow currant tomato. These guys basically live on my property permanently. So here's the flower truss that looks very much like what I'm used to seeing out of the yellow currant tomatoes. It's nice and big. I think that's the biggest tomato on the property right now, and I didn't plant it. There are beans in the compost pile. Don't know what type, but they're gonna flower soon. And do you guys remember the potato bin I planted? Well, nothing has come up, no potatoes. All of the greenery you see in here is just whatever sprouted from the hay that I set on top of the potatoes. I was curious and I put my hand in there looking for some potatoes to see maybe what was going on with them, and I was met with some pretty slimy, yucky potatoes, so that was kind of a fail initially. I do still have some potatoes in my house that are starting to put out little eyes, and so I'm just gonna wait for them to be more ready and then we'll plant those in there, so it's not a complete loss. We have a long enough season to still get a harvest out of this area. The volunteer cilantro is leaning really hard. We had quite a lot of wind this week. This cilantro is another thing that loves to volunteer on our property every year. It's awesome to have food just grow when it wants to. You can see we have these beautiful delicate flowers. Eventually the flowers get pollinated and it turns into coriander. So these are not dry yet, so not ready to harvest. But we don't only get to harvest the leaves of the plant before they flower, but after they flower, we can harvest a spice for the kitchen. I've seen some recipes for coriander bread that look very intriguing. I do come out here very often looking for mushrooms amongst, here we go. Amongst the cilantro here, we have quite the colony of wood bluets. You can see there's a bunch coming up right here, and there's some coming up back there. The wood bluet is not the mycelium that I happen to put in this spot. I put down some wine cap mushroom spawn, but we're seeing many, many wood bluets, which are also edible, so I guess it's fine. I did put some of the wine cap mushroom mycelium back here in the asparagus bed as well, and so far I haven't seen them come up here either. I have neglected this space a little bit. Last week about this time, there was a small tornado. It ended up being a big tornado as it went further up towards like the Hopkinsville area. But a small tornado formed about 3 miles away from our house, and it knocked the power out. It messed me all up in my normal routines. So some of the asparagus that I normally would have harvested and eaten has started to get way too long and woody to be palatable, so I've just let some of it go. I do still plan to harvest throughout June. Like this guy, I'll be ready tomorrow probably. Speaking of harvest, let's tackle this kale. So we have this kale bed here. This is the lacinato or dinosaur kale. I need to make a harvest out of this. All of the kale has survived much better than I expected for the time of year. We've seen a few of those cabbage looper butterflies. They may be moths, I'm not quite sure, but they're white and they like to lay their eggs on all manner of brassicas. But apparently they haven't been able to do a whole ton of damage, and we still have a lot of usable kale here that does not taste bitter. It is starting to get hot. I think in about a week our high is 88, and that's definitely pushing it for these cool loving plants. So I'm gonna make a big harvest today, which is why I brought out the big meat tote. And we've got other varieties behind me that we'll pick as well. There, that looks really different, doesn't it? But nice big bin of lacinato kale. Got all these varieties back here. I forget the name of this one. I will say this curly leafed variety has seemed to be the most pest resistant. One of my friends grew that variety in her garden last year, and it was the most heat resistant for her as well. Now all of this kale in here is probably going to equal another bin. So what I would like to do, I think, is deal with processing this bin first so that I can come back hopefully tomorrow or the next day and deal with what's here. This kale is going to hang out here just fine for the next couple of days. And I could harvest it and put it in the refrigerator and it would stay pretty good until I'm able to put it away. But the short span between harvest and preservation is just gonna help maintain the nutrients. Basically, as soon as you pick any kind of food out of the garden, it starts to degrade in its nutrients. So if I can leave this here in the garden until I'm ready to preserve it, it's gonna be a little bit better for us. I noticed a mushroom down here. That guy is probably not edible. Some kind of parasol type mushroom. The blackberries are doing what they do, and they are slowly taking over my walkway right here. We've noticed recently that some of the green berries are starting to blush, which means it will not be very long before we get to harvest these guys. They go from green to red to black, and then they're not necessarily ready to harvest as soon as they're black. We want their sheen to kind of dull out, and that's when they're the sweetest. Down here in the elephant garlic bed, I have a couple of plants that are a result of me just leaving bulbs in the ground last year. I was curious about the flowers on the elephant garlic, so I left a couple of scapes on and allowed them to flower. They were beautiful from what I remember. They were like a purplish pink little ball on the top. It looked a lot like an onion flower. But after that flower was spent and gone by, I just left the bulb in the ground, and so we've got kind of a crazy situation underground, undoubtedly, with this elephant garlic. And because it has died back quite a lot, I think we're at least getting close to harvesting, if not right at harvest time with these particular plants. There's quite a few weeds in here too, which really doesn't bother them. It's been raining quite a lot, so I've been a little bit worried about these guys. When it comes to harvesting garlic, especially these big ones, what I like to do is dig my hand underneath the bulb and loosen it that way and lift it up versus pulling up on the stalk. You risk breaking it at that point. And breaking the stalk isn't necessarily bad, but what that does is it kind of creates an open wound sort of near where those cloves are, and you don't get as long of a storage life out of the bulb. Oh my gosh, these guys are in here. I am finding some corms. We'll talk about these in a second. Gosh, I hope I can get this out. Because it was one basically huge bulb of garlic left in the ground, each clove on the bulb has put up its own stalk and created its own plant. So it's like an entire cluster of garlic that I'm trying to dig out of the ground here. with my bare hands. I kind of wonder if I'm needing a tool. Oh. I'm gonna pry apart my bed. Look at that. That's what leaving one bulb of elephant garlic does. You get this giant cluster. Holy moly. Look at that. Wow. I would like to leave as much soil in the bed as possible. Look at that. That is incredible. Wow. So this is what you get when you leave a bulb in the ground. So they're all attached together. They all seem to have this one root system. Let's go wash this off. Really, in order to cure garlic, you don't want to, number one, harvest it in wet soil, but we don't get really an option at this time. It just won't stop raining for long enough. But also you don't want to rinse it off or anything because you don't want to compromise the skin. But I really want to see what this looks like without all the dirt on there. Isn't that so cool? See the bottom? It's basically just all attached at the root there, and I'm gonna try and break these apart. Okay, can you see down in there? Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Plus this little monobulb, which I guess makes it 5. There, that's what we got out of leaving one of these in the ground last year. And this makes sense. Usually there's only about 4 to 6 cloves on elephant garlic, and we can expect one of those cloves to turn into a new plant. So the fact that we got about 5 plants out of leaving one bulb in there makes a lot of sense. And did you guys notice these little things that were hanging on the bottom over by the roots? These are garlic corms, and this particular one looks like it's actually putting down its own little root there. And this is one of the awesome things about elephant garlic. It's one of those things that kind of makes them perennial. They like to volunteer with these little corms. You don't necessarily have to keep back one big clove in order to plant it. You will get a bigger bulb and a bulb with multiple cloves on it by planting a clove out of a big head of garlic like this. But if you plant one of these corms, what you're gonna get the next year is called a monobulb. And that's what this is. It looks like an onion. It's essentially just one big giant clove. And these are perfect, they're great. They are just one big clove of elephant garlic. And if you leave this in the ground, it's gonna turn into a multi-cloved bulb like this. So it is a couple years before you get a great big harvest, but these are just kind of free, so why not leave them in the ground and be able to harvest elephant garlic forever. I think I'm gonna leave these guys right here and let them dry out. I may move them off the metal onto the wood. Look at the little wormy in there. You go, dude. And because I know this is gonna take a little bit of elbow grease and some more time, I am gonna come back for these other few plants later. The rest of the elephant garlic isn't quite ready to be harvested. As I mentioned, this was left in from the year prior, and this was planted earlier in the year, I think February. What we're looking for is the foliage to die back about halfway, and I don't think any of these have really started to die back yet. Maybe just a little bit. See that? So over in this arm of the U-shaped bed, our zinnia have started to flower. I planted quite a few different varieties. Some of the varieties don't get very tall, like this little variety here. It's a smaller flower, but boy, is it gorgeous. So tiny and pretty. And then there's this one here, and this one here. Just a gorgeous pop of color. The beans that are right next door have started to get a little bit bigger. I'm sure there's some real big beans in here that I haven't really been able to unearth yet. This particular variety, oh, look what I found. Ta-da! These are harvestable, that's for sure. Oh look, there's more over here too. See these? There's more under here. Well, I guess we are into bean picking season and I didn't even know it. Looks like something ate that one. It's okay. I can't exactly remember how many plants I put in here. I did put in a seed just about every 4 to 6 inches. And we did go through a frost with these beans. We covered them and we're already getting a harvest, and yeah, oh my gosh. I want to make sure that I am keeping the plants picked, because a plant really, it just wants to spread its seed. It's just trying to mature seed, and that's what it's doing with these bean pods. And if I can pick the pods off, it's going to signal to the plant that it has not completed its job and it needs to try again and put out some more pods. And that's what we're after, all these beans that I had no idea were out here waiting for me. I tell you, ever since that storm, I've been a little bit distracted and out of my routines, but getting back into it. That was a fun surprise harvest. Now, not that I didn't know that I was going to be harvesting these eventually, but that came faster than I really expected. So I like these Kalima bush beans because when I can them up, they remind me a lot of the canned beans that I grew up eating. It was those French style green beans, and I know that there's like a cutting device called a green bean Frencher. I've seen it for sale at the local Mennonite store, and this might be the year that I go ahead and pick that up, because I would love to bring back that little piece of my childhood, but the homegrown version. It was actually the Fiesta style green beans. I think it had little pieces of onions and peppers in it, and that's what I want to do. I want to repeat that. Behind me you can see the green stalk. It's seen better days. These are the tiny Tim tomatoes. There are still a lot of blooms and a lot of little fruits coming on. We do have some disease, and I've been going through here and picking that off. It has just been raining so much that the blight is pretty prolific out here, but we are still getting fruits despite that. These little tiny fruits are so good. I know that they would be so much better if we weren't getting so much rain. When you get a lot of rain, it tends to dilute the flavor down. And sometimes with a lot of rain, you start to see cracking on tomatoes. But I can tell you, this variety, I haven't seen one crack. This is just one plant here. Look at all the fruit on it. Got this one. Now, they do get more red than this, but we're expecting some more rain tomorrow. So just because I have been picking off the ones that have started to flush, because really they have essentially cut off their nutrition from the plant when they've started to change color like this, and there's not really any benefit in leaving them on. I mean, a vine ripened tomato really is delicious, but not when you are just expecting more rain. All they're gonna do is take on more water. Oops. Got a green one with that. I really need to do another harvest of our oregano, but similarly to the kale situation, the oregano is just gonna stay out here, kind of like a living pantry, until I am ready to pick it and stick it in the freeze dryer. The last time I loaded the freeze dryer full of oregano, I got an entire half-gallon's jar worth of oregano packed down. So I imagine we will do that again and then some, and then I will probably just let this flower and leave it alone for the rest of the season. I think an entire gallon's worth of packed down oregano is plenty. Still no flowers yet on the Kelwake Golden Chamomile, but it is putting on all these little buds, and I don't think it's gonna be long. I've got a couple volunteer yellow currant tomatoes that I left in this bed, and they're poking up above the chamomile just fine. Got some little flowers on those. Oh, I got one. Oh, look. Honey! We've caught another strawberry thief. These rats are so big that they cannot get out of this thing. Can you go give this to Daddy?
Yes.
Thank you.
There's a rat.
That is a rat.
A stupid rat.
So we figured out what's been eating my strawberries. So far we've caught 2 rats and a skunk. Even with the rat and skunk situation, I have picked quite a few strawberries out of here, with more to come. They just need a little bit longer. I like them to be a nice deep red when I harvest them. I did plant I don't know how many plants. It was at least 5 of a white strawberry variety, and I don't know exactly which plants are what. I've tried to plant a white strawberry for quite a few years and I never seem to get them to fruition, or I'm being sold a red strawberry instead of a white one. The only time that I really got a successful white strawberry out of my garden is when I bought the seeds. It was an alpine strawberry. They're smaller. They're super prolific. Those strawberries were very, very good. They came back for a few years and then didn't. I just didn't have them planted in the right spot. The grass took over. I may put in a patch of alpine strawberries again soon because those were really good. They kind of tasted like pineapple, if you could believe that. This great big elderberry that we have here is past its peak for blooms. It bloomed for, I'd say probably about a month, with the peak blooming lasting about 2 weeks. And I have made a lot of elderflower cordial. I have not made anything else other than the elderflower cordial. I have a little bit of time left to take advantage of these blooms. I do have a few other varieties of elderberry in the front yard, and those guys have just started to bloom, so having a couple different varieties seem to be staggering their blooming and fruiting cycle, which allows us to harvest a little bit longer of a season. But you can see a lot of these have started to put on their berries. They start out real tiny and green, and these will be quite a while before they're harvestable. Check out how gorgeous and lush the dill is. So this is the bouquet dill. This is just one of the flowering heads. See how big that is? You can smell the dill before you even enter the garden. Lovely. It's easily my favorite herb. I wish that there was a way to preserve dill and retain that fresh dill scent and flavor. You can dry dill, but for some reason it's not the same as the fresh. I'm sure that's true of a lot of herbs, but dill's my favorite. So it bothers me the most with dill. A few of our pickling recipes require flowering dill heads. And so in the past, I have harvested basically all of the flowers in order to save them for my dill pickle recipes. But the goal this year is to try to leave some so that they'll reseed themselves over here. Before we head up to the greenhouse, I need to update you guys on the loofah. We've gotten our true leaves that have come in. There's this one here and this one. We also have our chicken and dumplings cowpeas that I started in start trays. I didn't get an amazing germination. I guess they're still trying to come up. It may have been a bad idea to move them out to the garden underneath this trellis because the birds like to land right here on the trellis, and a tender seedling is a tempting snack for the birds. Gotten after a couple of these, but I think we're still going to get a pretty good germination. Lots of plants to put out, and there's still time. I just noticed something exciting. This is an exciting tour. I don't know if it's gonna get bigger, but I think I have my first and only bulb of kohlrabi that I have ever been able to grow. Check that out. I still have this cracked one that I left in the garden, but this one has survived. And I'm gonna pick it just because we are gonna get some more rain and I don't want anything bad to happen to it. I've never actually tasted kohlrabi. I try to grow it because a lot of people love it. I guess I'm gonna yank it out by the root. I like to try to leave the root systems in the ground to help feed the soil. I guess we'll do it that way. Chuck, 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 chuck. Come here. Kids' garden is looking awesome. Now I noticed recently that their ground cherries hadn't really grown at all since I put them in the ground. When we planted these here, I did not amend the planting holes with the Trifecta Plus fertilizer like I did in my greenhouse. And I did that as kind of a test to see what these guys would do without that. And the answer was they didn't do super great. I mean, they don't look too bad. They were in their start pots a lot longer than some of the ones that are in the greenhouse. And a lot of times transplanted plants will take a couple of weeks to really show much upward growth. And these guys really haven't done anything at all. So I did top dress with some Trifecta Plus and I actually did mulch them. And that should have these guys getting a second wind pretty soon. Addie's oxheart tomato is really big. We do have some blooms on here. Their cucumbers are doing great. I noticed that we have some of them flowering. And they do have a few little peppers coming on. See that little fruit right there? So it's going good. Their little garden is getting greener by the day. The mosquitoes are back out in full force. They were not so bad after that tornado that we got. It's like the wind blew them away, but they're back, unfortunately. There, turn off the fan so you can hear me. So earlier in the week, I noticed after the last garden tour that I was having a pretty bad aphid problem here in the greenhouse. And I have not had a lot of issues with aphids at all on our farm. And there's a couple different reasons that you can see aphids. And having a wet year is one of those things that really can just bring out the bugs. I treated these plants with a few different methods. I put down some neem oil. We sprayed them real good with some water. I am still seeing a few aphids. And this white powdery stuff that you see on the tomatoes in here, that's diatomaceous earth. And I think it's doing something for the aphid population. I haven't seen any ants since I put the diatomaceous earth down. And I think that the aphids are at least manageable at this point. So quite a few people who saw my video on the aphids did mention there's a couple different reasons that you can see aphids. I did mention having a wet year being one. Having kind of a lot of weed pressure around is another reason. And I do kind of have this strip back here that I haven't really dealt with. You see that right there? But also too much nitrogen in your soil can be a reason. And I think maybe there's a combination of everything going on. These raised beds technically are a first year garden space. And when you start a garden in any place that you haven't grown in before, there's gonna be hiccups that you deal with. And one of the reasons for that is the microbiome in the soil hasn't had a chance to develop. And that's really where your plant health comes from. That microbiome takes a few years to develop, and we're gonna have to stick that out here. But at least for now, I think we've gotten a handle on it. The plants have grown quite a lot. Not all of the plants had aphids on them. It was mainly just the tomatoes, and it wasn't even all of the tomatoes. The tomatillos here are officially taller than me. Granted, they are in the 15-inch bed as well, but they've grown exponentially. Down here at the base of this entryway archway, I do have Malabar spinach that has started to climb the trellis. This one over here is actually quite tall. You see, it's made it all the way up to here. Got lots of these really cool lanterns on the tomatillos. I've been kind of squishing on them to see if I can feel the tomatillo on the inside, and I can. It's probably about the size of a cherry. This is my first year growing tomatillos, and I'm not sure how to tell if they're ripe. I know that with things like ground cherries, you wait for the husk to turn brown, but that's something I'm gonna have to look up. Or you guys can tell me. I'll accept that for sure. Right next to the tomatillo, I have our Berries Crazy Cherry tomato. These are yellow tomatoes, and the reason that this tomato gets its name is the crazy amount of tomatoes that it will put on one truss. So you can see here, this is just one truss sticking out of the side of the plant, and all of those little tiny blossoms are going to become fruit later on. And that's incredible. I've wanted to grow this variety for a couple of years. You can see down in the bottom of this bed too that we are seeing some rodent problems here in the greenhouse. And there is talk about me getting a barn cat or two. I'm still undecided on that. One of the reasons that I've been a little bit apprehensive of that is I know that my indoor cats would eat plants, and I know that my indoor cats would sometimes use plant pots as a bathroom, and I really don't want that of my outdoor cats. But I feel like you kind of have to pick your battles, you know? So we'll see what happens with that. But this tomato is really tall. It's probably about, I don't know, 4 feet high in the bed. This is the pink oxheart tomato. It's put on these gorgeous huge blooms, and I noticed that we do have a couple of fruits coming on. See that? We do have a little bit of a bug hole in that one. But that's exciting. This is one of the plants that has that curly virus, but it's producing. Our mortgage lifter tomato is also flowering. This one is the Berkeley's tie-dye. Look at the huge bloom on that. Pretty sure all of the tomato varieties have blossoms on them, except for some of these cherry tomato varieties. These were smaller when I put them in. This is one of our super sweet 100 seedlings that's highly anticipated. It's gotten really big. We did have a bloom on our eggplants last week, and that little tiny fruit is growing inside there. Can you see that? We've had a lot of blooming activity on our pepper row as well. These poor peppers have been oversaturated with the amount of rain that we've gotten. You can kind of see how the water is pooling up on either side of the row there. And that's not good. Because of that, some of the blossoms and fruit have dropped off because the plants are stressed with having their roots just constantly in the moisture. It is possible for plants to suffocate if they are in too much water. Their roots need to breathe as well. Obviously not the way that we breathe, but air is important. They can't have totally compacted roots or totally saturated roots. I noticed in the wet end of the greenhouse that I have a volunteer. This is suspiciously squash related. Honestly, it feels like a birdhouse gourd. And I say that because birdhouse gourd leaves are very, very velvety. So that's my guess as to what that is. We have some gourds over here that we grew last year. And at least one of these I had cut a hole in. But I think the kids maybe, there it is. That guy may be the parent to our plant down here. I don't know. I'm gonna leave it. But back to the peppers. I think every single plant in here has at least thought about flowering. You can see we have this little unopened flower here. This here is the Pippin's Golden Honey, and they have purple flowers, and we do have a little fruit set right here. This one here is the Marconi pepper. It's got fruit. We also have fruits on the Nada-peno, the jalapeno, and the Tamdu, basically mild jalapeno. This one's getting bigger. See that? You can see through here the difference in size of the ground cherries that we have here in the greenhouse. I've been keeping my eyes peeled because I have seen some ripe ones. No. These plants are huge. It's amazing. See, this is what they look like here. They look a lot like the tomatillos. I have quite a few of these ground cherry plants in here. And they've barely started to ripen, but it looks like I've gotten them all in the last couple of days. The volunteer tomatoes in the greenhouse have started to set even more fruit. These guys are getting bigger down here. I have been using these tomato clips to attach the tomatoes to this twine, but honestly, I remembered a trick that I saw in someone else's video who grows their tomatoes up a string like this, is you can actually just twist the plant around the trellis like that, and it holds itself up so we can save these. I haven't tried that with the peppers yet, but the tomatoes have a little bit more foliage that kind of grabs the trellis like that. Can you see how the twine is kind of twisted around the plant? It's holding it up. I turned the fans back on because I am getting absolutely torn up by these mosquitoes, which that's one reason that I have not set up the irrigation in the greenhouse yet, is that it's just miserable to be in here, not because it's hot, but because of the bugs, the mosquitoes. Arguably too, I have been pretty distracted this week. I bought a couple of new goats. This here is Mooch. He's a sweetheart, aren't you, baby? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Are you trying to figure out how to get out? Aww. And this here is our other new goat. Her name is Foxy. She's having a harder time integrating with the herd. If you're familiar with our herd, our goat Clover also took a while to integrate with the herd, but she did, and you will too. That's what I've got for you guys as far as the garden goes today. But if you missed the recent goat video where we brought these guys home, I'll link that video up here.